Good evening. I'm Father Alexander. This is St. Peter's in Hove. And are you ready for our 110th step in our walking tour through the Bible? I want to talk about chapter 21 of the first book of the Kings, the famous and interesting um, incident of Naboth's vineyard. Now, it starts off Naboth has a vineyard, and it's right up against the royal palace. And Ahab looks at this vineyard and thinks, well, I'd like it because, it makes sense, doesn't it, to buy this bit of property because it's right up against my house. I can use it as part of the palace grounds. And he says to Naboth, I'll give you its value in money, or I'll give you a better vineyard for it. Perfectly reasonable request. And after all, Ahab is the king. Now, if the monarch asks you to swap a piece of land and so on, you usually say yes to the monarch. You might remember Cardinal Wolsey. He entertained Henry VIII at Hampton Court, and Henry VIII said, I like this house, and so he gave it to him. You don't mess around with kings. However, Naboth holds Ahab in very scant respect because he said, God forbid that I should give you my ancestral heritage. Now, there's clearly a barb in this. Naboth inherited this vineyard from his ancestors, whereas, of course, who were Ahab's ancestors? His father Omri was a rebellious army officer who killed the king of Israel and made himself king. He's saying, I am an aristocrat, I am a hereditary landowner, but you are the son of an upstart. So what happens? Ahab goes home in a sulk, becomes very depressed. And his wife comes to him and she says, a fine king of Israel you make. And we should listen to her words. Why are you so dispirited that you refuse to eat? And some king of Israel you make, get up, eat and take out. I myself shall get you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. Now, this is very odd because what happened in chapter 20 is that Ahab's just fought a war against the king of Aram, Ben-Hadad II, and defeated him. And he showed himself to be a very capable and very brave army commander, respected by his troops, and a good leader. But when it comes to the domestic situation, the man is completely different. He's completely under his wife's thumb, we might say. He is a wimp at home. And she upbraids him, and he doesn't say, shut up, you're talking to the king. Rather, he just does what she says. Now, she then takes his seal and writes letters in his name. So, in other words, he's quite used to letting the queen, Jezebel, rule the country in his stead. Now, Jezebel cannot rule the country because she's a woman. That's just the way it is in those days. But she can rule through her husband. So her husband seems to be more or less a front for Jezebel. Then Jezebel sets up Naboth. She sends out all these letters. Naboth is accused, and Naboth is stoned to death. And then Jezebel says, she says to him, um, and this is verse 14, no, verse 15, get up, take possession of the vineyard which Naboth of Jezreel refused to sell to you, but Naboth is no longer alive, he is dead. When Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, he didn't bother to ask what had happened to Naboth. Well, he knew, because he probably was he was married to Jezebel, he must have known what sort of woman she was. He knew that anybody who stood in her way tended to get killed. And he got up and went down to the vineyard of Naboth of Jezreel and take possession of it. So, where Ahab, great man on the field, weak at home, and abdicates power to his wife. And he lets the wife do the dirty work for him. The wife does the killing. It's very similar to what happens in with King David having the Uriah the Hittite killed, except here it's all rather petty. It's over a piece of land. And also, he doesn't get his army commander to do it, he gets his wife to do it for him. He must know what his wife is up to. And then, of course, Elijah turns up. Now, last time they met, he said, is it you, you scourge of Israel? This time he says, have you found me out, O my enemy? He says to him. And it's a rather good phrase. In my Jerusalem Bible, it says, Ahab said to Elijah, so you've caught me, O my enemy. In other words, With anger and with resentment, Ahab admits his guilt. He doesn't repent. He's angry that he's been caught, that he's found out. He knows that Naboth has been murdered by his wife. Elijah answered, I've caught you. You're double dealing. Since you've done what is displeasing to the Lord, I shall now bring disaster on you. I shall sweep away your descendants and wipe out every man jack of the house of Ahab, fettered or free in Israel. I shall treat your house as I treated the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and of Baasha, son of Ahijah, for provoking my anger and leading Israel into sin. And the dogs will eat Jezebel in the fields of Jezreel. Those of Ahab's family who die in the city, the dogs will eat. Those who die in the open country, the birds of the air will eat. And then the author comments, and indeed there was never anyone like Ahab for double dealing and for doing what is displeasing to the Lord, urged on by Jezebel his wife. He behaved in the most abominable way, adhering to idols, just as the Amorites had, whom the Lord had dispossessed from the Israelites. Now, actually, Ahab gets the blame for this, urged on by Jezebel his wife. The real problem with Ahab is his abdication of responsibility. He allows somebody else to do the criminal work for him. His greed, his lust, his childishness is what is apparent here. And then, of course, his anger at being found out. Ahab is a spoiled child. Then, of course, when he is upbraided by Elijah, just like King David being upbraided by his prophet Nathan, he repents. Ahab heard these words. He tore his garments and put on sackcloth next to his skin and fasted. He slept in the sackcloth. He walked with slow steps. Then the words of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite. Have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Since he has humbled himself before me, I shall not bring disaster on his days. I shall bring disaster down on his house in his son's days. And indeed, again, you see the parallel with King David. This is a brilliant short story, I find, this chapter 21. Ahab is a character in the way that very few people before in the Old Testament have been characters. Spoilt, childish, under his wife's thumb. Also, Jezebel is a character, capable, intelligent, confident, not frightened of what people will think, one who knows what to do and knows how to get it, and of course, eager to please her husband. She's eager to please her husband because he wants this vineyard. Okay, he gets a vineyard out of it. What's she get out of it? She gets the ability to exercise power in a totally ruthless way. She gets the ability to run the kingdom. Ahab, of course, is a person who has won the ire of the Lord. Why? Well, he connives at murder. That's pretty good, pretty bad. So therefore, you win the anger of the Lord if you do that. But above all, it's because he's broken all the commandments. He has not kept to the law of the Lord. He has allowed this foreign woman to take over the kingdom of Israel. The other thing about this foreign woman taking over the kingdom of Israel, she rules Israel in the way that pagan kings rule pagan kingdoms. She does not rule Israel in the way that an Israelite king should rule. In other words, in obedience to the law. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Two of the things she does. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Another thing that Ahab is doing. So she's breaking all the 10 of the commandments. And again, just like King David before. In other words, what we see here is the corruption of the monarchy. The monarchy, which is meant to be a sort of a religious monarchy, a monarchy in the light of the law of the Lord, has become the monarchy of the Phoenicians, a tyranny, a monarch who rules as a despot. So Jezebel is a wonderful despot. She makes an excellent despot. And of course, she reminds me very much of the character of Agrippina, the younger, in Claudius the God by Robert Graves, if you've ever read that book. Remember, Agrippina made a very good ruler, Robert Graves says, through the mouthpiece of her husband Claudius. A very ruthless ruler, but a very efficient ruler. It's also said about Agrippina, she had all the vices, but she had one lonely virtue. She was very brave. And as we'll see later, Jezebel is very brave. Jezebel's brilliant. Whoever invented the character of Jezebel, well, she actually lived, she's a real person. But the person who writes about Jezebel hates her, but at the same time, makes it clear that in a funny sort of way, he rather likes Jezebel at the same time. So, more on Jezebel next time. All the very best. Thanks for joining us for this 110th step. All the best. See you again soon.